Hey guys, this is Joshua Gibson with the Philosophical Weightlifting Podcast. This is episode 29, and today I'm joined by Jilly Jaworske. So Jilly's graduated from the University of Miami with honors and a BS in Exercise Physiology, has coached both CrossFit and weightlifting athletes in multiple states, is a high-ranking American weightlifter, and head coach of TSS Barbell. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
How are you doing?
I am good. I am, disclaimer, just kind of waking up. I've only been up for about an hour, only because I'm trying to catch up on sleep because the last few weeks have been absolutely crazy over here.
Yeah, I mean, you have a lot of changes going on. So I guess if you'd like to tell everyone kind of where you're at, how you're changing gyms and having a shoulder surgery, you can kind of talk about that.
Yeah. I mean, it's been not even really like a bumpy road. Like, I've been getting a lot of questions, maybe on Instagram, maybe via email, maybe in person. A lot of people are like, well, we thought you were affiliated with one gym, and then all of a sudden we see that you're opening up another space. And is it, a different team? Is it a new team? Was there a falling out? Which is kind of, interesting because, like, I honestly didn't even think about these questions. What basically happened, long story short, is that my team exploded. When I started, I had actually two lifters, and that's not to downplay it. I actually had only two lifters. And this was when I went out on my own, almost 2 years ago. I was not looking to get to really starting a team, starting a gym. That wasn't the goal whatsoever. I was coaching for another program in the area. I really enjoyed it, but at the same time, my own athletic career was at the forefront. And so I was in the process of switching teams, and I left the gym just because it was honestly a good decision on both of our, for both parties. And I was at this place where I was like, do I go back to work? Do I work full time? Because I was coaching part-time and training part-time. And I thought about working for a Rossi, which, if you're familiar with that, Texas is huge with a Rossi. Rossi's located here in San Antonio. I thought about going back and working for a Rossi. I thought about, I worked retail for a while, and I was like, I don't know. And I had two athletes who were like, well, we really still want you to coach us. And it was kind of comical, right? I was like, well, what do you mean? I'm like, I don't have a gym. I mean, I don't even have a bar for you to train on. I live in an apartment. I don't have a garage. They're like, well, we got to find somewhere. And so we kind of bounced around for a little bit, and we ended up at a large gym here in San Antonio. It is predominantly powerlifting, which is really cool, but the culture is really different from weightlifting. Mm-hmm. And when we were super tiny, we kind of just made our own space in a corner and fit in the best we could into a powerlifting gym. And that's Texas Strength Systems, and they're still open. They're still doing great. As we grew, we went from, Brittany, who is my business partner, she actually was one of my two athletes. She is now our assistant coach, but we went from 2 to almost 70.
Wow.
So when you go from 2 to 70, there are definitely growing pains, right? It was kind of stressful. There were moments of tension, especially being in a shared space. We were basically a standalone program when we left. And so that's, that being said, Texas Strength Systems has some cool stuff going on too. And a gym closed in town. We had a bunch of new people join who were more like bodybuilders. And it became this crowded space where no one was feeling super productive. And we had a talk with the owner. We're like, hey, do we sublease from you? Really actually carve out a space within the gym that's ours. Or what can we do? And it was one of those things where he wasn't sure. He wanted to wait. I really couldn't wait because 12 of our members sat down and had an intervention meeting with us. And they were like, hey, we're really unhappy. We just feel like we're on top of each other. There's 6 long platforms. There's 1 million of us. What do you think about opening a space? And I'm like, I mean, I've done crazier things. So I'm like, okay. I mean, how bad could it be? If people are begging you to open a gym, then you do it, right? I mean, or you I don't know, you quit. It was something where I didn't want to compromise the culture we'd created. And so it became one of these moments. It's do I just shut it down? Do I let it go? Do I open a gym and really go for it? Knowing full and well too, I've been a part of a few gym moves and gym openings. it's really, really freaking stressful. Like, I knew this going into it because, like, the very first gym opening, it wasn't even my own gym, but, like, I was working as an intern, and I interned with a bunch of smaller gyms years ago. The first gym opening I was a part of, I just remember being, like, covered in paint, and I painted for, like, 12 hours, and I remember not eating, and it was, like, one day of this, right? And I just remember thinking, wow, owning a gym is a lot of work, right? And that's like one day of setup. That's not even like running the gym. And I was probably, I don't know, 19 or something. And so I kind of like, you forget, right? Like, you know, you're like, it won't be that bad. But there we were looking at spaces. And then we found one shortly. It was like right after the Arnold. I want to say it was like, yeah, like this was like a month ago. So this was like right after the Arnold. And they're like, okay, well, do you want to move in? We're like, okay, it's the second week of March. Crazy. Like, I don't know, because we opened April 2nd. And then we started, we were talking a little bit, figuring out things like we would have to pay those 2 extra weeks to move into the space, figuring out how we were going to finance everything. For a little bit, Brittany and I thought about like going in on a house together as an investment here in San Antonio. So basically, instead of buying a house, we just opened a gym. That being said, I am extremely, extremely, extremely fortunate in that I have clients who adore us. And I don't say that lightly, and I don't say that to sound like pompous. Like, they actually are the best people ever. I had a member, actually her husband, and he's been following us literally since I had two athletes. Like, his wife was like one of my athletes. And this woman has been to every single gym with me. Like, I mean, ride or die. There was one time, and this is like almost like that. What is that movie? It's like Bridesmaids, where they like sneak into the park, you know, and they're doing the fitness class. Okay, we like snuck into Lifetime and worked out together. And I say that with air quotations because like we were totally like undercover. Like, I was like coaching her, and then I'm like, oh, it's my mom. You know what I mean? We went through some rough, like we started at the bottom, okay? And we're still kind of working our way to the top, but we were at like the very bottom at one point. So like Jason's her husband, he's watched this whole thing because like his wife has never stuck with anything, and she's just been with me since, like I said, day one. He's a psychiatrist in town, and he's obsessed with fitness. And he's like, my dream, because he too sat down with us, Brittany and myself, had an intervention. He's like, look, he's like very selfishly, he's like, my dream is to be a part of a gym opening. He's like, I don't care how. He goes, I don't know what it looks like. I have no idea how to open a gym. I'm a psychiatrist. However, he's like, this is my boy dream. He's like, what can I do? He's like, can I buy out a share of your company? And like Brittany and I are looking at each other like, seriously? Like, you want to buy out? Like, because we have, you know, an LLC, like it's a legitimate company. He's like, I want to buy it out. Like, I want to buy, you know, it out. And we were like, well, what do you mean? He's like, well, you know, how much do you think it's worth? So then we had to learn all of this, right? Like, we have an accountant, obviously. So we had to figure out like how much 20% of our company was worth. And then we actually sold it to Jason to then open the gym more or less debt free. And so it was like figuring out all these tiny things. It all just kind of came together. It's like we didn't really go to Jason. We didn't, you know, our members came to us to open the space. It was something that was super organic. It wasn't like one day I had this crazy idea, you know, like, hey, I'm going to open a gym. I just don't feel like being here anymore. It was totally out of need for like our own space. So that all being said, this was like 3 weeks ago, which is hard to believe because it feels like 3 months ago. Because when you're opening a gym, time, like the days just all run together. I have totally not been thinking about my shoulder surgery, like at all. I knew it was coming. I've known for 3 years I needed it. I kept putting it off and putting it off and putting it off. And I finally told myself, I said, after I open this gym, I'm just doing it because I knew I was going to get kind of out of shape doing like a gym opening, in the sense that it's so much work and like physical labor, moving things, building platforms. Like, we didn't hire contractors. The only people we hired were a plumber and an electrician because like I don't have those skills. Brittany doesn't have those skills. But like all the painting, moving, staining, decorating, like that was us. That was like 2 people, and then whenever our members could help. So I said, after we get it like to the point where we're open, like our soft opening, because we'll have a grand opening in May once it's fully decorated, we decide what to do. We have like a quarter of the gym left. We're not totally sure if we're going to build it out or just leave it open for our competitions. Then I will feel like, okay, we're done. But just like for now, we're just getting started. But yes, in the middle of all of this, well, a couple of things. We had the Arnold. Then we decided to set up a gym. I also moved into a house because I was like, why not? And I was like, I'm already super stressed. So I moved 30 minutes away. into a house. That was, about 3 weeks ago now. It was like within 4 days of the gym. And in the middle of that, we ran a weightlifting meet. And it was like our biggest one to date. And people just looked at me and they're like, are you okay? Like, are you mentally okay? Like, how are you doing? I'm like, I think I'm good. I was like, I'm really tired, but I think I'm good. So yeah, balancing all of that has been interesting for sure. Totally.
It's really interesting to see where you are now, but I would like to kind of start when you first got introduced to the sport, or maybe when you first got introduced to athletics, and kind of what has led you to this point, because you've made it pretty far as a weightlifter and a coach. So I'd be interested in hearing that story.
It's really, when people ask me, it's one of those things where it's like, how far back do you want to go, right? Like, a lot of people don't know, and a lot of people don't understand or even like see the parallels between the two sports. I actually was an equestrian, which is a super weird one. And a lot of people don't even really think of that as a sport or understand that that is actually an Olympic sport. The parallels are like strikingly similar. I started when I could walk to ride, which again, most people don't even know this part of my life. As soon as I could walk, I was on a horse. By the time I was 9, I was like competing locally all over. I grew up, I'm from Boston, but my parents moved to Florida. So I really, really started getting into the horses when I was like 9, because in Florida, there's these huge show circuits for this type of hunt seat equitation, show jumping, sport. Like there's a lot of different divisions. And so if you're not totally familiar with that equestrian world, like I could go into detail, but the general idea was that it was preparing you for like, all those lower levels for something like upper level weightlifting, like the equivalent, where you worked, your entire like elementary, middle, and high school career to like go to the equivalent of senior nationals. So that being a totally different sport, you're in charge of like horses, and horses are way more work than a barbell ever will be. You have to learn things like responsibility, and taking care of something that's like way bigger than yourself from the time you're tiny. Parents are not usually around. Like, I know that's kind of weird, but like your trainer is kind of like your aunt or your uncle or your godparent because you spend so much time with them. I basically like grew up with my trainers. Like I was never home. I was either riding a horse before school, or I was riding after school, or it got to the point where I was missing so much school because I was riding so much that I finished high school at like 16. So I just stopped. I just moved out at 16 and got my first job actually riding in New Jersey. So I was a working student in New Jersey. I rode more or less all over the United States. Like I don't want to say like I was one of the top juniors, because in that sport it's different, right? Like they have like 10 girls who are the top, and then the other 90 who even compete at that level. Like you're all that good. Like it's such a weird niche sport that like anyone who makes it to like that top 100 is phenomenal. Like, and it really then comes down to financial opportunity, working student opportunity. Sometimes you just get really lucky. Or like, my first job, I actually worked like with the Springsteen family, like Bruce Springsteen and like his daughter. Like that's just something where when you're in that financial situation, it provides more riding opportunities. It provides more competition opportunities. And I was really, really lucky in the sense that like she had so many, this is a problem. This is an actual equestrian problem. She had so many horses to ride that I actually had a job riding her horses, right? But like we were actually competitors. So it was this weird, it's weird. It's a very weird sport, right? Imagine having so many barbells, you can't lift on them all. And then you someone to lift on those barbells. Like that's a normal thing in that sport. So it's really twisted. Like you're working for these people, but you're also competing against them. You're also like 16, which it's kind of like gymnastics, I guess, in that sense. Like you're super young. But you usually don't really see like huge success in that sport until your late 20s or early 30s. And there are some people in that sport who, when they go to the Olympics, they're in their 40s and 50s. So it's bizarre. It's totally bizarre. And it's because it's so complex and so technical. It's not really even until you like mature as an adult fully. And that's like my biggest takeaway, because I actually quit when I was 19. I was just like done. I was at St. Louis Nationals, and that was the last time I even sat on a horse. I just literally packed up all my stuff, gave them my address to ship all my things. Like I had a pretty rough parting of the ways with the sport. Honestly, because I thought I sucked. Which, again, growing up, I had multiple trainers, and they would scream at you and tell you that you're a quitter, you're a sack of shit. Like they were brutal. They were brutal, right? Because at a certain point, like once you're past 17, they're like, you're going to either turn pro or you're going to be an amateur for the rest of your life. I wasn't ready to be an amateur, and I also wasn't ready to be a pro, so I just quit, like straight up. And that's the truth. Like at 18, like what do you know at 18, right? I knew I didn't want to be an amateur because I knew I could have been a professional. But I didn't fully understand, because I didn't come from a horsey family. I had like left my family. I left my friends. Like there were pieces that were missing that I needed to develop to become a professional. So after, like I said, I was on the road for about 2 years, and you kind of live like a gypsy, and you sleep in like trailers, houses with a bunch of people. Like you just kind of like make ends meet because you're flat broke and you're riding horses all the time. I had a full ride to UM. Well, first of all, when I say I finished high school, I was my class valedictorian. So it's not, don't like get the impression I just like skipped out on school and like didn't care. I was just super hyper focused on being an equestrian. I at one point was like living outside of Toledo, working for a sales barn, because unfortunately, while I was trying to become a professional in that sport, the recession hit, which I lived 30 minutes outside of Detroit and about 30 minutes outside of Toledo. So like having any work at all in that industry was super rough. Like you were scraping the barrel at that point. Like I didn't have Wi-Fi back then. I didn't even have a cell phone with Wi-Fi. I drove like 30 minutes to a laundromat. That's like where I applied to college, in the laundromat, because I didn't even have a washer and dryer, which like people don't understand this about me, which again, they shouldn't, it's not like anyone would guess this, but that's honestly how I decided to go to UM, right? Like I was living outside of Detroit. It was miserable and cold, and I was in a house with like 6 other people, and sometimes we had electricity and sometimes we just didn't. And we used candles a lot, which like looking back, I'm like, this sounds so crazy, but it's like the truth, right? And I was sitting in that laundromat. It's Super Suds, right? And like the woman who runs it, we're still Facebook friends, and she's awesome. Her name's Sandy. And I would sit in there with Sandy all the time. She's like, Jilly, you need to go to college. I was like, I don't want to go to college. I'm like, I don't want to do it. I was like, I have all this work experience. I've been working since, basically I was a child. I was like, why do I want to go to college? She's like, you just got to try it. She's like, you got to do new things. She's like, you're burnt out. Like, you're over it. Like, you're living in this miserable place. Okay. You're at the laundromat just so you can get Wi-Fi. Like, girl, something's got to change. And so I was like, okay. I applied to 3 colleges in Florida. Like I said, my parents are from Florida, or in Florida. I got into all 3, got full rides at all 3. And I picked Miami because in my head, it looked like the nicest one. I did never even been to Miami. I'm not kidding. I didn't look at the school. Didn't know what I was going to major in. No idea. I just showed up. Like I said, okay. And so, like I said, after St. Louis Nationals, I quit, which was around that fall. And I started at Miami. And then the biggest issue then was I didn't know why I was in school. So that's how I found fitness. Our dorm was across from the gym. And I didn't know, I had been to the gym before. Like I used to do cardio and some like lightweight training, like to stay in shape to ride. But I lived across from the gym. And so since I wasn't riding like 12 hours a day, I started taking like every single fitness class imaginable. And that's eventually how I found CrossFit. I got really involved in student organizations at UM, and they were starting a CrossFit club. And I was like, why not? I was also part of like a Holla for Hunger club, a business club, like a Marine, like I was part of everything. Like I was just trying things because they didn't really have like an equestrian club that was accessible. You know what I mean? Like you had to go drive an hour. I was like, okay, like it was time. Like I tried pole fitness, for God's sake. I tried Zumba, you name it. And I was like, I'm doing it. Like I am trying it. So that I fell into fitness. You know what I mean? Like I'd been an athlete and a competitor my whole life. I was super competitive, school, riding. But then when I got into CrossFit, I was like, okay, I'm going to do this. And it was funny because I got into CrossFit through Noah Olson, who back then, like nobody even knew. And Dylan Malitsky, if you know who he is, he's very involved with like Wadapalooza and whatnot. And those 2 were the ones who were like, you should try CrossFit. And I was like, I don't know. And they're like, well, girls can't even do CrossFit. This is like back when no one was doing CrossFit. Well, girls, they can't even really do CrossFit. We only have guys signed up for the CrossFit club. And I was like, oh, I'm doing it then. Like, I'll see you there. And that was it. Like Noah taught my fundamentals back in the day. He can tell you I was like their biggest success story at one point, because like I cried my first day because I seriously, when I started, and a lot of people also don't realize this because I've gotten like tinier recently, like I've shrunk. I started weighing 53 kilos, like with fitness, because I was so tiny from riding my whole life. I was so tiny and so weak that like overhead squatting the 15 kilo bar wasn't going to happen. Like I worked on a trainer bar for about 2 months. I was terrible. I was straight up terrible, but I was hell-bent on like becoming good at it because I wasn't used to not being competitive at things. And there weren't really there were like 2 other girls in my fundamentals class and they weren't super into it. So I would just compete with them. Like I wasn't actually really competing with anybody. Like it was just them and then all the boys. But then from there it just escalated.
So how long were you involved with CrossFit before you made the transition to weightlifting full time?
3 years. I went to regionals on a team with Peak 360 in 2013, which again, like huge success story, right? Like girl crying with the trainer bar makes it to regionals. Like again, there should be like, what is it? That overhead press paper. Like I feel like they could they could make a joke out of my CrossFit career. But seriously, at that point, yes, I made it to regionals. Really was still struggling with snatching, which in overhead squatting, like it was something that I just was really not good at. I also weighed about 58 kilos at this point. And I was determined. I was like, I want to go back to regionals. This was the conversation. Like when I actually ended up at CrossFit Seoul working with Danny Lopez Calleja, I came to him and I'm like, dude, I want to go back to regionals. And he straight up looked at me and he's like, Jilly, you need to snatch body weight. And at the time, this was like this absurd conversation, right? He's like, Jilly, I don't know if it's going to happen. He's like, body weight for you, it's like almost 60 kilos. And I was like, Danny, I'm going to snatch body weight. And I, like I said, I did not move well. I had no idea what I was doing. I was not strong. I hated squatting, which that hasn't changed, but I still hate squatting. I still squat, but I don't like it. I started with him in his weightlifting program, which at the time, like, honestly, at this point, I think I had started with Danny just before regionals. So this was like 2012, 2011, maybe. Yeah, because I had dropped in. So I had dropped in. That's how I'd found Danny. So I was dropping in for their weightlifting classes, but was terrible. And this is why Danny was like, Jilly, it's not going to happen. They had a group of girls there who were actually like legitimate at the time. There was like maybe 3 of them and everybody spoke Spanish. And they threw me in with them. And I was just in a rotation with them. And he had 2 platforms. Like there was a girls platform and a guys platform. And no matter who showed up or how many people were there, you were on that platform. And so they like would put me in and like strip the bar. You know what I mean? Put the trainer plates on and then like take it off and put like 70 kilos back on. And I'm like, there's no way. There's no way I'm ever going to be able to lift these girls. But I was like angry about it. So I would do that once a week, once every 2 weeks, whenever it fit into my CrossFit training. I was still going to Peak 360. Going then to Seoul for weightlifting coaching because they didn't really nobody really had weightlifting coaching then. Like Danny was the first person to really do it in South Florida. Like he was a pioneer in that sense. He was like the only person hosting weightlifting meets, the only one who had even like a team Seoul, like a weightlifting team, a club. He was the only gym that had certs for weightlifting, and Camargo was teaching him back then. It was something where when after regionals, like I said, in 13, I was super frustrated. Danny's like, dude, you just need to join the gym. Like, I don't know how to break this to you because, I was really active with the Canes CrossFit Club, which is, what we called it. Noah was the president. At one point, Dylan was the president. I was like the vice president. I was treasurer one year. Like the 3 of us like went back and forth with it. And we all kind of have like these like unique fitness careers now, which is interesting. Around this time, I switched my major like 6 times. I'd finally switched to exercise physiology and economics. And that's actually how I met Steffi Cohen. And she was working with that same weightlifting coach because she too was part of the Canes CrossFit Club. And she really wanted to do weightlifting. Like it was that weird time where people really started to be like, maybe I'm leaving CrossFit. Maybe I'm going to do this weightlifting thing. So she was the one like, dude, you just need to leave the gym. You just need to leave CrossFit. You need to stop doing kipping things. She's like, you need to work with Camilo. And she was snatching like 25 kilos at this time. Like we both, I don't want to say we sucked, but we both were like very, very beginner weightlifters. Like if you had given us a CrossFit WOD, we could probably snatch 100 something pounds, right? Like very ugly. But as far as like our weightlifting technique went, it was not good. I mean, like I was teaching snatches to people because I was coaching CrossFit. But I wasn't like, yeah, I totally get this snatch thing. I don't think you really understand the snatch thing or the clean thing or the jerk thing. someone posted the other day on Instagram, like, you don't really get it until you do it. Until I did it even kind of correctly for the first couple of years, like, you don't get it. So yeah, we started working with Camilo Garcia, who used to coach the Cuban national team. And he only speaks Spanish, and I don't speak Spanish. So everyone would translate for me. And that was like the first almost 2 years of weightlifting, was learning how to weightlift from someone who didn't even speak the same language. Which, again, like, he was a great instructor. He believed in us. He called me Rubia because I was blonde, and like, that's just my name. He didn't even know my name. But he would always be like, you lift like the Russians. Like, he was like super encouraging. He's like, you're gonna be good at this. And surprisingly, his favorite lift of mine is my jerk, which is my least favorite lift. And he's like, I love your jerk. Like, he would get like super excited. And that was it. He was just very passionate. And I've had more technical coaches than Camilo, but for my first weightlifting coach, I mean, he just got me to do it. Like, he got us to show up every day, and weightlifting is hard. So when you start and someone's telling you to snatch 80%, like 5 or 6 or 7 times for doubles, you have to have someone there who's like, you're going to do this, like, you're going to be good at it, or else you don't show up, you go back to CrossFit or you do something else. So that's really the reason I stuck with it. And then from there, like, we just go on forever. But life took a lot of crazy turns, and I stuck with weightlifting throughout those turns. And eventually it led me to San Antonio, and then eventually it led me to opening my own place.
So I know you're working with Colin now, but like, as far as your coaches from CrossFit Soul and on, who were they, and kind of what do you think they imparted on you as an athlete and a coach?
Okay, so I had Camilo Garcia. If anything, because like I said, I didn't get much out of it, right? Enthusiasm, encouragement, love for the sport, dedication. That man was always there, rain or shine, sick or well, without fail in his minivan. He'd roll up every day at the same time. And it could be one person or it could be 10 on those 2 platforms. And eventually we had like 6. But yeah, like, I've never met a more dedicated coach in the sense of Camilo. And Steffi still works with Camilo. You'll see her like randomly lifting at like his gym. But we both love him. Like, he's phenomenal. From there, I actually kind of got stumbled upon. I didn't stumble upon him. I started working with Spencer Arnold. So Spencer's Power and Grace. He's super well known now. At the time, he was coaching a lot of CrossFitters, and I was working at a gym on the west coast of Florida. How I got there, very long story, but I was only there for a brief amount of time. It's close to where my parents live. So I was in this period of transition after college, not sure what I was doing. And I was coaching some kids, like squatting. And Spencer, if you've ever met Spencer, he's like he's a salesman. Like, he can sell ice to an Eskimo, okay? And he walks up to me, he's like, are you a weightlifter? And of course, this is like the highest compliment I've ever received in my entire life, because I've done like maybe 3 or 4 weightlifting meets at this point. And I was like, I mean, I want to be. I was like, I don't think I'm a weightlifter, but I really want to be. And he's like, well, how much do you snatch? And I weighed like 61 or 62 kilos. And I was still thinking about, continuing to cut to 58. And I was like, oh, I snatched like 77. He's like, what? I was like, yeah, I did it in the garage the other day, because they had like this like little annex area. He's like, you snatch what? Like, he just like looked at me like, seriously? And I was like, well, what do you clean and jerk? And I was like, oh, I don't know. I was like, I don't really max out that one. I'm like, I don't really like the jerk. I know, but I was dead serious. I was like, I don't know, like 88, 90, something like that. He's just like, you're not a weightlifter. I was like, I've had a weightlifting coach. I've done some meets. I'm like, but I'm not like a super competitive weightlifter. He's like, well, are you a CrossFitter? I was like, I'm an okay CrossFitter. I was like, I went to regionals. You know what I mean? He's like, oh, at this point, everyone's gone to regionals. And he's like, well, do you want to be a weightlifter? I was like, yes, I really want to be a weightlifter. So I'm not even kidding. Like, that night, took me to dinner, handed me a contract the next day, and was like, you're a weightlifter now. And I didn't even know what happened. I didn't even know. Like, I was like, okay, I'm a part of this team. It's called Power and Grace, and now I'm a weightlifter. And Spencer taught me more, well, in English, in like 2 hours than I had learned in my entire first 3 years of lifting, or 4 years of lifting. He just like has a way with words, and sometimes it's really funny. If you've ever worked with Spencer, like, he just tells it like it is. He's kind of a cowboy, but like in a good way. He just explain certain like nuances to me, or like he'd stop me. The bar could be in half an inch off the ground, right? He's like, no, put it down. Do it again. No, set up again. No. And people ask where I get that from. It's him. Because I do that now too. And it's really funky because there was one session he taught and we were just fixing the first pull, and like my first pull was terrible. And he's like, one day you're going to get this. He goes, and then you're never going to not get it. He's like, and then you're going to teach someone else how to do this. And you're going to sit here like I'm sitting here he's eating Girl Scout cookies, right? He's got an entire box of tag-alongs and he's just like, oh, no, go down. Just like this. And I was like, who is this guy, right? But yeah, like that obsession with doing it right, definitely Spencer. Like 100%, because he's so nitpicky. Like it could be a PR and he's like, it was okay. It was all right. And I was like, really? He's like, it could have been better. But, all of a sudden I was snatching 80 and then I was snatching 82 and then, it was mid 80s. And it worked out for a long while, but I moved to Texas because he said I needed to move to Texas. So I was like, okay, I'll move to Texas. My coach said I have to. Not really. Like he lived in Georgia, but he's like, if you could go anywhere, he's like, you should go to Texas because it's cheap and they've got weightlifting there. Okay, I'm 22. I'm turning 23. I was like, I'll move to Texas. So I looked on a map and I looked at the cheapest place to live in Texas that had weightlifting. Straight up, found San Antonio. And I was working for Lululemon and they had 2 Lululemons here. And they needed someone to help with product management, and that was what I was good at. And within like a week of deciding I was going to move to San Antonio, I knew I was, going to move there. I had a job lined up, and I moved here. And I was over at another gym in town. Spencer had hooked me up with Steve Galvan, who owns 210 Weightlifting. And so I was just training out of 210. And at the time, like Steve had like kind of like a smaller weightlifting program. It wasn't like it got really big, but when I got there, they probably had like 20 or 25 lifters, and it was just kind of starting to grow. And he was like just kind of starting to get into like weightlifting photography, and like he has his hands in like always like a million different things. So like it was something where I walked in, and that was the first time I trained with a group of English-speaking weightlifters, like a consistent group, which again sounds crazy because now we're at like year 4. And it was just really cool. Like I was just super excited to train with English-speaking weightlifters. So I was with and this is also very confusing. So while I was in Texas, obviously worked with Steve, was still working with Spencer remotely, got to work with Ursula a little bit, took her course. Steve brought Tarakti in, got to work with Tarakti for a little bit. We had Ian Wilson come in, got to work with Ian a little bit. So there was like all these, different influencers, you could say. Every person, like I think you talk to in weightlifting, shapes that career just a little bit more. And it's not like there's any one person who has like molded my technique, or like I look at when I hear myself, I hear different people speaking. Or like I hear, like when I was 19, I'm not the same person I am at 23. Like the stubborn, pig-headed person I was at 19 is not the same person I am at almost 26. Does that make sense? So yeah. When you talk about like the influence, like there's been so many. Like there's not one person who I mean like, yeah, that was the one, I mean? Like obviously Spencer played a huge role. And like Colin, God, thank God for Colin. Like, I love him so much. He's phenomenal. He's my coach now. Obviously, Colin plays a huge role in how I coach now because I can understand concepts now that I definitely couldn't understand when I started coaching. Like, even CrossFit. Like, if I had had Colin when I was 20, I wouldn't have even valued Colin like I value Colin now. You know what I mean? I was not ready for the intensity that was Colin Burns. Like, mentally, physically, as a coach, no way. Because he is super intense, but he's also, I think he's the best. So that's just my personal opinion, but that's why he's my coach. So I think that if you don't think your coach is the best for you, then you should probably find a different coach. And that's my advice to anybody who's listening. But yeah, I ended up actually, my video turned off because, there we go. Sorry about that.
Okay. Oh, it's fine.
I ended up working out at 210 until it didn't work out. And it was just one of those weird things. Like I said, I had a contract with Spencer, which I learned later is kind of unusual in weightlifting. But, like, I didn't know any better. Like, I had just, like, signed it. And, like, that honestly just wasn't something that, like, everybody was super crazy about. So it created a little bit of tension. And, I tried I eventually like left Spencer, not really because of the contract, but because I was living in San Antonio and I was training in Steve's gym, and it just became, as Steve's program grew, I was like the one odd person out, and that is very hard, right? If you're training with an existing weightlifting program and you have your own program, it can just, it creates like dissent almost within a gym. So we tried it. Steve didn't want to be on bad terms with Spencer. I didn't want to be on bad terms with Spencer. I tried Steve's program for a little bit, and what ended up happening was I ended up working for Steve because he didn't realize how much I had coached. And then one day he had me coach somebody, and he's like, do you have coaching experience? And I was like, Steve, I've been telling you this like since I moved here. I was like, yes. Like he just kind of like watched me like, huh, well that was interesting. Like, cause I coached a lot of beginners. And so from there, that was like 2016. So he was going to Rio. He was super busy with photography. He more or less left myself and Brittany, who's my business partner, to run the gym. And I have a super strong personality. I'll be the first person to say it. Like I definitely have one of those personalities where you either really love it or maybe you're not crazy about it. And Steve also has a super strong personality. And what I've found is like most head weightlifting coaches have a very super strong personality. It's not like this like timid, meek person that's normally like an assistant coach. No offense to any assistant coach out there because you guys work your asses off. But I think that because of that, a lot of us have to do our own thing. And Steve realized that before me. So when we had like a parting of the ways, like I did not understand it. And now it's like the best thing that ever happened to me, right? But I need to do my own thing because like we had a different coaching style too. And like the way that I want to run a program isn't the same way that he wants to run a program at all. Which, is good. We're like 5 miles down the road from each other and we both have like really big programs. It's like, how does that happen? I am completely different. And I think that some of his members really liked it and probably some of them really didn't because I am so different from Steve. Just like all of my members really like it. And that's why there are other existing programs out there, you know what I mean, where they have coaches who are different than myself. I'm pretty intense. I'm pretty loud. I'm pretty no nonsense. I will make you do it until it's right over and over and over again. And I will strip weight off your bar. Like I'm not afraid to do it. I also coach predominantly men and he coaches predominantly, females. So there's that. He has Yadier. And then when I was there, it was just girls, just like all girls and a handful of guys. I coach all guys and a handful of girls. So I left, like I said, having like 2 people who actually like just followed me. They're like, we can't live without you. It was like one of those very dramatic experiences, right? You feel like very needed. I was like, what do you mean? I'm like, I don't have a gym. I was like, like I said, I don't even have a barbell. I was like, why? You know what I mean? I was like, okay, all right, we'll figure it out. And that was it. That was always my answer. We'll figure it out. You want to train with me? We'll figure it out. You want to open a gym? We'll figure it out. You want me to write your programming? I'll figure it out. And then here we are. Eventually, Brittany, who started as like one of my first athletes who was running their CrossFit program, she came. She's like, I can't live without you. It was like one of those things where she's like, no. She's like, I just found a weightlifting coach. She's like, you can't do this to me. Like she just started working there with the intention of like learning to weightlift, and I was her coach. And she's like, She goes, that is the only reason I'm even coaching CrossFit. And then like Tracy, who is Jason's wife, who, like I said, she does like mostly general fitness with me, but she was like hell bent, man. I mean, she wanted to like fake work out at Lifetime with me. So, that was it. But that determination, that grit, that like perfectionism, I guess you could say it started when I was riding horses, right? Like years and years and years of like mucking stalls, grunt work, like moving stall mats, by the way, like into a gym, clean stall mats is nothing compared to moving manure-covered stall mats. That was like the first thing. Like I'm not very, like Brittany said, I'm not very technologically savvy, and there's some things I'm not very good at with like power tools and whatnot. But you gave me stall mats, and I'm like showing them how to move them effectively, and everyone's like, "How do you know how to do this?" Like of all things, Jilly, like you're like hustling these stall mats in. I did that from like the time I could barely get my hands around a stall mat, weird life skills, like super weird life skills.
Yeah, so there's definitely a lot of questions that come out of that. One thing I would like to talk about, so you've had a lot of influence from the weightlifting side, but as far as your education has played into how you program and how you coach athletes, can you tease anything out of that, or is it just kind of like something you have to tell people that I have a degree in exercise physiology?
it's one of those things where looking back on my college education, and I think most people can agree with this, it wasn't like there was like one lesson and you were like, that was it. This is it. I am now a coach, or like, I am an exercise physiologist. I now know everything, right? It was the collective experience of going to college, and that's why you go. Which again, I didn't understand the point of college until I finished college, which is like most things, right? It's like you don't really get weightlifting until you've been weightlifting. No, when I graduated, I think if I could take one thing away from my entire college experience, I had this phenomenal professor, and he taught because it was a small program. For those of you who don't know, UM's a private school. There are only 10,000 undergrads. Most people don't realize this. It's actually like a tiny private school. So everybody knows each other. So I had one professor for like 7 classes. One of the biggest points that he brought up, because a lot of people ask me about my bachelor's of science in education, right? They're like, why is exercise physiology in the School of Education? And I'll never forget, I was sitting in the classroom. He's like, all of this information, he's like, it's going to come to you really randomly. He's like, you're going to be somewhere and you're going to remember something that I said, and it's just, you're going to spit it out, right? He goes, but the way that you spit it out determines if it has any effect at all. He goes, because it doesn't matter how much you know any of this stuff. He's like, honestly, it doesn't. He's like, we're in the School of Education because it's your job to educate people. And I was like, oh, that was really profound, Wes. Like, it wasn't intended to be profound, right? But I was like sitting there probably like doodling, or I don't know. Like I definitely wasn't on Instagram. Like, it's just because like no one really used Instagram like that when I was in college. I was probably like doodling something, and I'm sitting there and I'm like, that is absolutely true. And as someone who had started in the business school at UM, and like I said, I finished with economics as well, but like I did not enjoy business like I enjoyed all my classes in the School of Education. It was so true. If you want to talk about coaching, you want to talk about programming or how I write a program for someone, you got to educate them. Like, we're beyond the phase, like weightlifting, USA weightlifting has moved past the phase of do what I say because I said. Like, I'm sorry, you can't do that anymore. Like, unless you are a senior international coach and that person just trusts you. And even then, that doesn't always work. Like, we have moved past it because so many people want to learn about the sport and so many people have questions that if you don't, or they don't know the right questions to ask, right? If you can't educate them on what they need or how they should train or who they should be working with. Like, I straight up tell people, I may not be the coach for you. And that's the first conversation I have with them. Like, I meet with them and I'm like, point blank, this is what I do. This is what I offer. This is my style. And I educate them. I'm like, this is how I run my business. This is how I coach my athletes. This is how we go to meets. If this is something that you think you might be interested in, like it's like almost like a syllabus, then I said, we're probably going to get along. But if you're not, then there are other coaches and other systems and other programs that might be better for you. So if there's anything I got out of my college degree, because like, yeah, randomly, I will just remember things from my like gross anatomy or nutrition classes, or actually started my master's in nutrition at UM, and I got about half of it done. But I didn't finish, again, due to some family issues. That's why I ended up on the west coast of Florida. I had to defer, and then I just never went back. I will randomly pull from that, but it's not like, I don't even really have to say it. You know what I mean? People, when they talk to me, they're like, what's your background? Like, I had someone ask me if I was a PT the other day, and I was like, oh gosh, oh no. I'm like, I'm not a PT. And they're like, well, how do you know? Like, everything you're saying is so spot on. And I was like, well, I was part of a really good program at UM, and it's like reflective in my coaching. You want to understand why I understand biomechanics. You want to understand how I understand physics. I was also pre-med because I said, like, I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. That collective college experience gives you all those tools to then be a good weightlifting coach. Like, if I hadn't taken biomechanics, then weightlifting would be harder. If I hadn't taken anatomy, then weightlifting would be harder. But I don't know. I don't really, like, people ask me, and I'm like, oh yeah, I went to the University of Miami. They're like, really? He's like, yeah. It's like, I went. You know what I mean? For me, I'm like, yeah, of course. Like, duh.
So looking at all of those general skills you've developed, now that you're out of school, what resources do you look towards to continue learning and to continue educating yourself on the nuances of programming and technical development and all of those different aspects of weightlifting?
I think this is like the hardest thing for people to really wrap their heads around. There isn't like a really good formal education system for coaches in this country. There just isn't. I mean, I've taken the USAW courses. They're pretty good, and it really depends on who you take them with. I took my level 1 with a coach in Central Florida. Sorry, not Central Florida. Central Texas, and he was pretty good. I took my level 2, my advanced with Sean Waxman, and I flew out there to do it because I really wanted to do it with Sean. The biggest thing is if you want to coach weightlifting, you have to go travel and you need to go work with a lot of different coaches. And that's like a whole nother thing. So when I was starting TSS Barbell, and this is, again, an astronomical number, between Brittany and myself, we spent $50,000 traveling in a year and a half. We went to Juggernaut. I was on Juggernaut for a little bit to work with Max, to work with Chad, to work with Colin. Obviously, all the athletes out there. We also flew out to see Waxman. We also just took weightlifting trips. We went to meets. We started coaching at national meets. I was competing in them. I have stints here and there, like freaking Danny Camargo, who's a saint. Like at some point he has coached me to fill in for Spencer. Like there are so many experiences, and the more that you work with people and the more that you see the way that you program, you start asking questions. Like I had someone ask me, can you teach me how to program? I looked at him and I was like, you don't really get this whole thing, do you? Like, you got to learn how to coach first. If you don't know how to coach and you don't see the issues with your athletes, if you can't identify them, and that's the other thing. People send me videos all the time. I need like 3 videos. If you send me like 3 videos, I can probably write you a program pinpointing most of your issues. You get to a certain point, it's very fluid. But if you don't have those conversations or ask those questions or take advantage of those courses, for example, taking your advanced without having, 4 or 5 years of experience is kind of pointless because the whole thing is discussion based and you talk about programming. And I brought all my programs with me and Sean and I sat down. And of course, like Sean was super excited and like geeking out with me. And he started going through like Caitlin's program with me and Allie's program with me. And I'm like, ooh, and we're like, all the different pieces, right? Everybody else in there is like, well, I've never coached weightlifting. And I'm looking at them like, are you crazy? I was like, this is a wealth of knowledge. And like, you don't even have questions because you're not even coaching. When you're talking about programming, like, yeah, you have to go work with people. You have to go work with coaches that you respect. You have to go work with different coaches until you find the right fit. And it's not that you're like a coach hopper. It's just if you really want to coach and you really want to bring your athletes the best information possible, then you have to go work with people who are more experienced than yourself, because there's not like a single text or a single program or a single coach who's going to teach you. I truly believe everything you need to know. I think that, like I said, the collective experience of participating in weightlifting at a high level, and like honestly, I have an ounce of talent. So like I work really hard, but I also compete at the level I compete at because I didn't know I was going to be good at weightlifting. I have pretty good levers. I'm pretty fast. I'm fairly strong. Like even that experience competing helps me to be a better coach, right? And even if you don't have that talent, you can still compete. You can still compete to the best of your ability. You can still be a good coach. You know what I mean? You don't have to be a very high level athlete to be a good coach for some people, right? Because there's a lot of people that would still benefit from your experience. And we're not talking about, myself coaching like a Maddie Rogers, but like there are people who still want to learn weightlifting and I can teach them, And then you start coaching those people. You start with what you have. You know what I mean? Someone walks in your door, they want to learn weightlifting, then it's your job to give them all the knowledge you have. And if you don't have it, then you've got to go find someone who has it. If I have a question, I have a coach. Coaches need coaches. So I go to Colin. You know what I mean? Like out of all the coaches I've worked with, I bonded best with Colin. We got into like this heated discussion for 2 hours and I was like, this is it. We just fucking argued for like 2 hours. Excuse my French, but like I was like, done. This is it. This is my coach. I was like, and at first he's like, I can't coach you. We're on Juggernaut. I was like, I was like, I need you to be my coach. I was like, I don't know how it's going to work. I don't know what it's going to look like. But I was like, he got me. And I could ask him questions about pretty much anything. And if he didn't know, he found out. Or if he had to think about it, he would just sit there and think about it until he had an answer for me. Because I'll bring him like random questions, or I'll have athletes who do weird things. And I'm like, this is a really weird thing. I was like, can you, explain this to me? Or like, have you seen this before? Have you dealt with this before? And Colin, having like 10 years of experience with just weightlifting, and then all of those years of experience from various sport backgrounds, kind of like myself, like he at a much higher level, but similar background in that sense. You I learned from him. I learned from Court. Like, I still learn from Kristen. Like, we all have different experiences and we all communicate, and then that makes us better coaches. Does that make sense? Like,
Yeah.
you never stop learning.
No,
ever.
it makes a lot of sense. And I do want to direct the listeners to a podcast I did with Colin Burns quite a while back. You can search for that on my SoundCloud. But as far as like the influences that you've had on yourself from many other different inputs, I am interested to hear like your general approach to programming, because sometimes it's easier to classify it into systems. So like a Russian system, there's more variation, lower percentages, high volume. A Bulgarian system is more specific and higher intensity and lower volume. So maybe if you can just give us like a quick overview, I'm really interested to hear about that.
So as much as weightlifting program can be said it's intuitive, it's not. Like you said, it makes more sense to follow a system. Again, it's like, who are you coaching, right? Are you coaching a beginner? Are you coaching an intermediate lifter? Which, again, some coaches argue there's no such thing as an intermediate lifter. I disagree. That's just my personal experience coaching a lot of beginners. Or are you coaching an advanced athlete? I definitely I have more of a Bulgarian style of coaching, straight up, like I just do. Now, that being said, I have worked with some coaches who freaking love the Soviet system. And guess what? I also coach with the Soviet system. Whoa, weird, right? Like, no way. Are you telling me that there's different systems that actually work? Yes. My beginners, straight up, it's Soviet. It is Soviet all the way. And I started Soviet, and it's not straight Soviet because I do give them Bulgarian pieces because it's fun and exciting and sexy, but it's super limited by like range of motion, or, you know what I mean? Or their ability. But I'm not going to put someone who just started on a Bulgarian program like myself. Or like Colin he has a lot of influence, obviously, from Zygmunt, but there are pieces to it that are, you know, you're doing maximum effort for the day. It's something like, I can't give an intermediate lifter 5 maxes in a day. I can't. Even if it's an 8 rep max, right? They kill themselves. Like, they don't understand the concept of leaving 2 in the tank. Like, that's like, they don't know themselves well enough to know what 2 in the tank even is. I know there's probably other coaches who just coach one way, and that's what they know, and they had really good success with it. The basis of everything I teach is technique. And I was not someone who had good technique. I, in fact, hate technique work. But guess what? It makes me a better lifter. And what I've learned over time with all my weird shoulder problems, issues with my hips, if I don't have entire blocks dedicated to technique work, which then it looks, like I said, high variation, it's like more Soviet. Even now, like, I throw my lifters on a little bit of a 4-week Soviet cycle, and they're like, oh, this was really fun. Like, seriously, they're like, this was really fun. Like, you know, you're like super into weightlifting when you're like, wow, that was so different and interesting. Because like I really do have a more Bulgarian approach with the understanding. And I think this is where like a lot of people don't understand the Bulgarian method. It's maximal effort for the day. And sometimes that's 80% and sometimes that's 100%, but it often is not 100%. So if you go into, because the first time I tried a Bulgarian program, it was one that I written for myself. That was a freaking mess, man. Like, I did not understand. I was like, this is the stupidest thing I've ever done, as someone who had like grown up on more of a Soviet system. You have to be smart about it, and Colin is smart about it. And if there's anyone who understands that fine like point in between the two, like when we need variation and when we need to be a little bit more Bulgarian, it's Colin freaking Burns, man. He gets it and he teaches it and he understands it, and it's smart and it is intuitive in the sense that as an advanced lifter or a more advanced lifter, there are pieces or there are days it's go by feel. And I think that's incredible, right? You break away from the percentage mold, and as a gym owner, right, as someone who has a ton of stress in their life, sometimes 80% is 100% for me that day. So that going by feel, you got to know your lifters. So when people ask me, well, how do you program for someone? I'm like, I have to get to know them. Obviously, I have a beginner block that I normally, like, I have like 4 different ones that I have written. And I throw them on one of them, depending on like the first conversation I have with them on the phone, if they're remote or in person, or I watch them move for a little bit. Like I said, I pick like I triage it. I pick our biggest issues and I'm like, okay, we're going to do this first 4 weeks. See how it goes. And if they try to kill themselves, because if I think they're more advanced and I realize they're actually going to kill themselves doing something Bulgarian, I pull them off of it and we switch straight. I'm like, nope, we're not doing this. But I stay in constant communication. And that's the thing. If you're actually coaching, then writing the program is easy. Because if you know what they're struggling with or what they're not getting, you can then pick, exercise selection. That's huge, right? You can then pick the exercise to correct the issues or create the desired result. So yes, I would say more of my beginners are Soviet and more of my advanced are Bulgarian. And then I have an intermediate group that's right in the middle. And it goes Soviet, Bulgarian, and then it's Soviet again. And they do like one Bulgarian block, because any more than that, their bodies physiologically, mentally, like they can't handle it. They can do that for about 4 weeks leading into a meet, and then we're right on back onto something that is more like technique based or lots of variation. It's exciting, it's low percentage, and we're focused on technique. And that's a super overgeneralization, because then I have some people who don't fit either mold. And we kind of have to go week by week. And I write programs, by the way, week by week. I work overnight every single Sunday. I start around 8 p.m. and I work until about 7 in the morning. And I write all my programs.
Jesus.
I teach the program weekly. And it depends on how they go. And we have, like I said, 70 lifters. So I split it and we work overnight to write that every week. It's not like I give them a 4-week block or even a 2-week block. Every week I go through and they have a qualitative style log where they are recording all the qualitative data that I need, that explains why they shit the bed that day or why they had a great day. And then I have a quantitative section where they're recording all the actual numbers, all the actual volume they completed. If I see that we are failing, then it is a good indicator to me that 1, I need to talk to them, 2, figure out what's really going on, 3, work with them in person, like actually see why these, things are happening, what they're describing. Because we have like team style training, which is like office hours where everybody trains at once and all levels train together, because I don't believe in separating people out. I think that beginners should be with advanced lifters and advanced lifters should help my beginners. But I also offer one-on-one coaching. So I do a lot of one-on-one coaching. Those one-on-one sessions are for us to fill those gaps. Like, why aren't we getting this? Why are we missing this? Or, oh, wow, we need to drop your, max down because this number or this exercise, we just made all these technique changes. Like, I need it, that's how you write a program. How do you pick the right numbers? How do you pick the right percentages? Well, you freaking watch your athletes. And I hate to say that. Like, I hate to oversimplify it like that, but I didn't understand that. Sorry.
Oh, you're fine.
I'm looking at the screen. I didn't understand that until I started watching 70 different athletes. And until you watch them and you really pay attention to what's going on, that dictates the program. You take all those tools that all those systems, by the way, that you've completed yourself. If you are not doing those cycles that you're writing, or you haven't done those cycles or a variation of that cycle, you need to start there first. And I say that, and I'm like a big believer in that. Like, I train 6 days a week normally. I don't write 6 day a week programs that I have not done myself. That is a big part of it too. You not only learn by watching someone go through it, but by putting yourself through it as well, you also learn about your own program. Because if I can't handle it or something is too intense at my level, someone who is just starting or someone who is, starting to progress, it may not always be the best fit for them. Sometimes you write something and you think it's going to be the greatest cycle ever, and then you actually try it and you're like, whoa, we need to adjust this, this, and this. Or by 4, right? Like, I have spreadsheets where every week 7 of every program I do, I always shit the bed. And I always know this, that like on week 7, my body is so tired that when athletes come to me on week 7, I'm like, it's okay. It's that experience, too, that allows me to empathize with the athlete. And it really allows us to connect in a way where like they see me going through it myself. And so I can reassure them, hey, it's going to be okay. By week 10, you're going to be fine. Or, week 16, like, it's going to be great.
So, that was great. And I know you're pressed for time. So, when do you have to be finished up? Just curious.
Technically, like, now. So okay. If there is,
can I just maybe ask if we could, so like we recorded this and I could release this as like a part 1, and then maybe we can schedule another podcast in a few days and do a part 2.
Yeah. Disclaimer, I'm going to be super drugged up. So it might be like they're removing a section of my clavicle. So they're actually taking out part of my bone and they're sewing my humerus back in.
Oh, wow.
So I don't know what kind of condition I'm going to be in. I think I'm going to be fine. But like, I have a phenomenal ortho I've been working with for 3 years. he's not really super worried about it, but like I don't want to get back on until I'm like lucid.
Sure, sure.
Like, and I want to make sure that like I'm fully with it. So I can text you when I am not on any pain meds and be like, hey, I'm starting to feel better. Like I would totally feel good about like getting back on and doing a part 2, but it might be like closer to a week. I don't know. I really have no idea how bad it's going to be.
Yeah, I won't be releasing this episode until next Saturday, and then the part 2 would be released a week after that. So we have plenty of time to play around with, and because I would love to talk more about like technique development, and then I have more like a philosophical kind of abstract section where we go into like just kind of far out questions. So I wouldn't want to miss that.
Okay, cool.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining me, and I'll kind of just like